They walked 7 miles together, and yet they still didn't recognize him. They didn't recognize his face or his voice or his mannerisms until he blessed the bread and broke it and gave it to them. Somehow this act communicated Jesus' presence in a way that his body and his voice did not or could not. And then, of course, he immediately vanished from their sight. Now, there are a couple of things going on in the road to Emmaus story that would tend to undermine literal interpretations of what happened in Jesus' resurrection. First of all, if the resurrected Jesus was simply a corpse that was revivified, stood up, and walked out of the tomb, shouldn't Jesus have been immediately and easily recognizable, if a bit disheveled and perhaps a little smelly? Furthermore, if the resurrected Jesus was embodied in precisely the way that you and I are embodied, how would he have been capable of vanishing, as today's text tells us that he did? Ordinary human bodies have a hard time just disappearing from plain sight. And ordinary human bodies also have a hard time walking through locked doors, even though Jesus seemed to do exactly that when he visited the disciples in last week's gospel. So as we enter more deeply into the Easter season, what do we do with the strange body that Jesus seems to occupy? Especially today when he joins the 2 disciples who are walking on the road to Emmaus, and they do not know who he is. Even as I struggle with resurrection portrayed as a neat and tidy physical resuscitation, I also recoil from accounts of resurrection that too easily relinquish the body, accounts that explain Jesus' mode of resurrected presence as little more than a heavenly vision. I recoil from attempts to alleviate us of the difficulty of physical resurrection by too quickly labeling the mystery as symbol or metaphor and then closing the case without any further investigation. Many of us move in this direction, I think, because it's all a little embarrassing, a little too magical, a little too far-fetched. It's not respectable to believe such things, so we demythologize resurrection, trying to make it less shocking, less appalling, more palatable to the intellect. In doing this, though, we lose something too. We lose the profound affirmation of embodiment, of the human person as a union of body, mind, and soul that is inherent in resurrection faith. For in a very deep way, the resurrected body tells us who we are, an indissoluble unity. And we need to be told that again and again in a world bent on fragmenting and splintering us, a world determined to disintegrate and commodify us. And so we return to the curious unfamiliarity that the disciples experienced in their encounter with the risen Jesus on the road to Emmaus. How might we understand this surprising unfamiliarity without turning the resurrected body too quickly into an apparition, into something that is somehow less than fully human? And how do we keep physical embodiment at play without likewise resorting to the folly of literalism? It seems important to acknowledge that most of us have fairly disembodied understandings of ourselves much of the time, as well as quite a disembodied vision of the afterlife, if we have one at all. Most of us feel mildly inconvenienced or even outright perturbed about the notion, in the words of theologian Brian Robinette, the notion of dragging a body along with us through eternity. And yet Christianity has always affirmed, according to Robinette, that the body is far more than a temporary vehicle for personal identity, far more than a disposable expression of an immaterial soul. Christianity understands the body as the very way that personal reality is accomplished in the world, and therefore understands the body as permanently constitutive of our human identity. The permanence of our embodiment then means that at death, the entirety of our embodied life is made present as a simultaneous whole to God's eternity. The entirety of our embodied life is made present as a simultaneous whole to God's eternity. End quote. In death, we will see God face to face. And when we offer God the fragmentary, disjointed pieces of our lives, God will reflect back to us the wholeness that God has always known and seen and loved, even when we could not know it or see it or love it. God puts our fragments back together in a way that enables us to finally make sense of ourselves, to understand ourselves ultimately as a unity. And this post-mortem encounter is, of course, something that seems likely to be transformative, even redemptive. Our embodied life, taken as a simultaneous whole and beheld by the loving gaze of our Creator, retains the entire truth of who we are, but also becomes something categorically new, something radically distilled by and perfected in love. Indeed, the resurrected body is so fully saturated with love that it becomes almost illegible to the ordinary gaze, which is perhaps why the disciples could not recognize Jesus on the road to Emmaus. It's a body at peace, a body freed from all compulsion, a body affirmed in its entirety, and a body at union with God. And this renewed body, then, is what is revealed and made present in Jesus' resurrection from the dead. In Jesus' post-resurrection appearances, his presence is most definitively embodied, and yet his mode of embodiment is somehow transformed and therefore difficult to recognize. Difficult in part because we are conditioned not to expect transformation, because we mostly expect things to stay exactly as they are, because we don't expect a divine interruption to mess with the way things have always been. For if anyone knows how things are supposed to be, it should darn well be God, shouldn't it? But I think that's just the point. God's vision of how things should work is often quite different than ours, which seems to be why God must use disruptive innovation to catch our attention, to catch us off guard, and to open us to freer, truer ways of being human. The resurrection needs a body then, because the resurrection is not just about feeling Jesus' ongoing loving presence with us. If that were the case, any old spirit would do. We need a resurrected body because this human life really is ultimately all about bodies, about persons who live in bodies, bodies broken and bodies mended, bodies touching and communicating, bodies betraying and bodies fulfilling, bodies infinite in beauty and complexity. And these bodies of ours are the tenderest of things, so easily bruised and wounded and scarred. We can so easily decide that they are an inconvenience, that they are less than who we are or more than who we are, undervaluing or overvaluing them at will. So I think we need to be told again and again and again that our bodies matter, that our bodies and the bodies of others are vehicles of grace, and that our personhood cannot be abstracted from or excised from our bodies. And we know this to be true because a body showed up among us full of grace and truth to touch all that was untouchable. And that touch has continued all the way down to us. This faith, this resurrection faith, has passed from hand to hand by touch. It is not an idea, it's an interaction. I think this is why the disciples ultimately recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread, because they remembered that when they were last together at table, as Jesus broke the bread, he said, "This is my body given for you. This is my life given for you. This is everything given for you. Take, eat, live in me as I live in you." They remembered being with him, sharing with him at table, and then their eyes were opened, and then they could see. We too continue in the remembering as we likewise continue in the breaking of the bread. The meal that we share here is a resurrection meal. It's a meal that roots us again and again in our bodies and in one another's bodies and in the body of the world. It is a meal that makes us possible and is a meal that makes everything possible. This is my body given for you. Now give your body for another. Do not be afraid, for in your very body you shall one day see God. May it be so. Amen.